in terms of the size of a business that can actually tackle the personalization problem. I think it's a very large problem.
Well, the only thing I would add is that there's different business models in different layers of the value chain. So Nokia is going to sell, they're going to make a lot of money selling 400 million devices and some services on top. Facebook has already figured out their business model, and some services like theirs, some will succeed and some will fail. They'll look like they'll succeed, and then companies like us, we found that users are willing to pay for the sort of UI enhancements that we can provide. So we're all kind of finding our different models on the value chain. Huh?
I'm sorry?
Well, for Vlingo? It's no longer. I mean, yeah.
One thing I think is an important distinction, that's something that we don't usually talk about. Your phone, for example, comes out of the box with no context whatsoever. I mean, most of the time, most of the technologies we use today are almost, brute force. You put in a couple of Wi-Fi access points, and if it happens to see the access point, it'll try to log on and go. But it has no distinction between what your home is and what your work is. Establishing those types of things has actually been quite important within our most recent devices, actually trying to define basic contextuality between common roles people find themselves in. So, it doesn't necessarily mean we have an early monetization model for it now, but a project we're spinning off right now out of our Nokia Ventures arm is actually in home control initiatives in European markets. So the idea is, now if you've got the device and you're near your house, the contextuality of the device should, for example, turn the lights on in your house. Perhaps maybe 10 miles out, actually start heating your house up. I mean, there are a bunch of different things here that I think that we can throw off that haven't been explored mainly because of the fact that the contextuality has been limited very much in the device, as well as most of the experiences we have to date have been defined around the desktop browser or extensions to that. And I think the mobile space actually offers a unique opportunity for us to explore these areas anew with an entirely different set of assumptions. And I think that's one of the reasons why, one of the reasons I came to Nokia 5 years ago, and one of the reasons I continue to stay here is that to me this is greenfield. This is the oil rush, and to quote Daniel Plainview, I'd like to drink other people's milkshakes in this space rather than have mine drunk. Next question.
Writing is going to be one of the main adoption drivers for voice recognition, right? And we can see there are some initiatives from car manufacturers, for example, Ford is implementing the Microsoft Singing and some of their models. Do you think we're going to see some collaboration between cell phones and application developers like Windows with car manufacturers to assemble some kind of technologies together in the future?
Yeah, actually, I mean, it is in the Ford Sync they're using Tell Me, right? It's happening.
Yeah. But is there more of it is going to go on? Certainly, absolutely. And there's lots of technical issues around that. So how does Bluetooth affect speech recognition? Actually, not very well. So we have some technical challenges, but clearly that the use case of on the go, of which a good part of that is driving, is something that has to be solved.
I think we've gotten now into another emerging trend that's occurring in this, in that the mobile has actually kicked off, which is separation of the collection side of this from the display side of this. I mean, where we actually input does not necessarily mean where we output, and I think Vlingo is a perfect example of an early separation of that. If we could theorize, the next S-Class Mercedes will have internet capability and its command system and be able to show, for example, your Facebook tweets over, let's say, a WiMAX network or an LTE network. It doesn't necessarily mean that might be the best interface in which to update it. It might actually be cheaper or more efficient, either from a bandwidth utilization perspective or from a monetization aspect of how the operators position particular products. So it might be I might input via the mobile phone using Vlingo, because I can rely on this service-based advanced engine that can deal with multiple interactions, but at the same time be able to display it on a much more general purpose device like the 5-inch diagonal screen in a high-end luxury car. But I think it's also where we can create and where we consume will very, very dramatically split over time. We're not going to quite, I think, get to the model we have in the Minority Report where you walk in and suddenly all the LCD monitors start trying to sell you underwear. I think that there are some social aspects of this that will need to be worked out. No one wants to walk into Victoria's Secret with their new girlfriend and have it suggest the bra that went with the outfit you bought from the last girlfriend when you go in there. So I think we'll have to work out some of the issues associated with how user context actually gets deployed in either commercial or in a private context. But I think recognizing that how we collect the information, how we display it are separate is a good start to that.
So I want to add another vertical that we didn't mention.
Please.
If you look at the healthcare or the mobile healthcare, it's a whole new initiative now to use mobile devices to connect to home appliances like the scale or the blood pressure monitor, things like that, and really enable a whole new industry of mobile healthcare that you can actually have higher quality of life as a user, also for well-being, not just for when you're sick. So just using mobile devices to improve your well-being, quality of life, and so on is a tremendous push. It hasn't happened yet for some reason, just like the smart home hasn't happened yet. Telematics is happening in automotive, so that's an interesting question why it's happening there. Maybe because of the music.
Yeah. Well, and to that particular point, we actually are in the midst of spinning off a project that was developed by Nokia Research called Nokia Sports Tracker, and it was originally one of those research initiatives that comes out of we put GPS devices in the actual device, GPS chips in the actual devices. What can we do with that is unique beyond the basic location-based services that we see today? And in that, we've actually built a social network around the construct of using the mobile device to track your running within a particular exercise context, be able to show that map, show how fast you ran, where you ran, be able to share those maps with other people. So when you go to New York and want to jog Central Park, perhaps you can actually utilize other people's tracks to actually do that. So I think out of the basic contextual services, I think we'll see a proliferation of very, very micro social networks that are based on individual contexts, either the context of location itself or derived contexts such as running tracks. And I think that there's a very, very broad opportunity for this, mainly because I think there's not one social graph that actually represents all the needs of a user. I have a Facebook account. I have a PlayStation Network account. And they're both two very important social graphs for me, but they're also very separate. One's anonymized, one's not. One's around a very specific set of experience, one's around a general experience. That doesn't mean that if the PlayStation Network went away tomorrow, it wouldn't necessarily distract my life as much as if Facebook went away. But I think we've also learned that from the MySpace to Facebook transition that users are finicky, and when opportunities are come to actually refine or to adopt a better view of the social graph, they have absolutely no qualms about doing it. I'm going to hop here and then I'll come to you. Yes?
Question around video and how does video fit into the network? Where do you see that going just overall?
Yeah, it's a great to start with the network on that. No?
Well, there's no issue with the video, actually, right?
I think if you've seen the operators in this space actually be very, very careful on how to move into video, mainly because of the amount of bandwidth it consumes. There was a dust up, and I think it was unjustified with AT&T a few months ago with the iPhone Slingbox player, and I think they have a legitimate concern on how to actually optimize the network so that such a community issue, such as bandwidth consumption, actually does have an impact on the health and use of that particular network. But video done right and optimized for mobile, I think absolutely has a role, particularly as we move to LTE. I think it's going to be a killer application. I think we've seen with Facebook as an early use case for that. People are obviously attracted to this. Now, necessarily has it gone to a social aspect yet? I don't think we've gotten to a point where video has gone as broadly social as, say, photos have in the Facebook context or music has in the MySpace context. But I certainly think with the explosion of high capacity storage and devices, as well as the increasing not only resolution but speed. I mean, our N97, for example, can actually shoot 30 frames per second. It can actually act as it can display back in our I believe it's the N900, our newest device that we announced last week, can actually display in 720p. So I mean, I think video is on the verge of actually becoming a very critical aspect of mobile, and I think that we're getting the technology and the equipment right just at the exact same time as we're getting the capacity and the optimizations of a network and the density of a networks right. So I think video will take an incredibly important role in the next 10 years. How it will manifest itself, I'm going to leave that to people who are. This is Los Angeles. I'm sure there are at least 3 people in the room who are better at video than I am on this. Shoshana? Or?
I don't have anything to say.
Yeah, you got a question?
As the social networking sites continue to go towards mobile applications and usage, where do you see most of the regulations come on? You touched on some of this in regard to the hands-free and what have you. But you're already seeing, as an extreme example, people that are minors getting pursued by public PAs as registered sex offenders because they send a topless picture to a boyfriend who then sends it to a friend over state lines or something.
Yeah.
And where do you see most of that regulation coming from? Because obviously it's not going to be the handset piece, but that's not what's driving the behavior.
I'm just saying, in any new technology area like this, you see, I mean, initially there's a phase where things like this happen. Then it's somehow stabilizing what makes sense. I mean, I don't have anything else to say.
Well, I mean, I think we've seen some rather critical advancements in terms of image recognition technology and the such. And I think there may be a role for an operator, either in a regulated sense or in a public as an actual product, to be able to act as a filter for these types of things. I was reading one article over the weekend. I can't remember. It was specifically about the I believe they call it sexting. Trend and the types of things that parents need to be aware of, such as does your child need MMS capability on their device? Should they be able to turn off technology? Should they be able to get audit trails of these things to be able to see what things have actually been sent? So I think being at that in the case of Facebook, for example, or in case of these sexting type adventures, the operator is the only service provider that actually gets to see the entire transaction. So I think by that. By the nature of that, I think there is actually a role for some of the services and the emergence of these next generation networks to actually deal with. I don't want to get to the point of filtering of content, although the network operators have obviously proven capable of that in the past. In some ways positive and in many ways negative. But also I think that there is definitely a role for new products in the mobile operator space that actually give some additional control and parental rights over the use of devices and how these devices are actually functioning in those areas.
That's my hope. I mean, just like in the hands-free or the distracted driving case, my hope is to do my part to drive the industry to provide market-based solutions, because you never know what government's going to do. And so in that case, so products that and services, social networking sites that perhaps take away the anonymity of users, right? So there's a marketplace. There's an example of that the other day for parents driving their kids to social networks that you actually lose your anonymity. It will confirm that you are you. And I don't know the details of actually how they do that, but I think there's even more opportunity for those sort of services in the mobile space, because the carrier's involved. That actually helps you a lot. And so I hope the market and the industry solves this, and not governments.
The number one news source for figuring out the social trends behind this, from my perspective, has been The Onion. I don't know if anyone has seen The Onion video news network, but they actually have created some very interesting social satire around the problems of for example, Facebook and Twitter stalking by parents. I believe that was this week's one. They had another one where a fire was ruled as not an arson because there were 356 photo streams and videos and Facebook status updates around the fire that they could mine from the police department perspective. So it does take it to its logical conclusion. But I think the point that it makes there, and I think it's an important distinction, particularly as the operators look into this space, is that there's a big difference between acting as a net nanny and acting as big brother. Right. And I think the operators are going to have to tread into this area very carefully, because I mean, if you're over the age of 18, perhaps that's not only appropriate, but it may also be a business model. We have time for a couple more questions. Yes, sir.
You were talking about the user interface, and it seems as though everybody's been talking about it in terms of English only. Are you doing work as well to make it work, say, in French or German or that kind of stuff, or places like Canada, France, etc.?
Yes, actually. Yeah, so definitely. We'll be moving in very, very quickly into Europe. Can't exactly say when, but it's imminent. And that will be for not only UK English, which, by the way, in Speech World, that's a different language, French, German, European Spanish, Italian. So all of those will be moving in those markets, providing user interface for users and companies who'd like to utilize that in those areas. And there's some stuff that we can do outside of pure language development. Simply grouping people who sound alike. So it's not only from people, say, in the Northeast versus the South in the U.S., or Canadians who can all use the same kind of language product, but we can do some smart things about grouping them together and doing some work there. And then you mentioned the Finnish English example. We actually have done that.
Finglish is what we call
English, that's right. So definitely.
But I mean, I think also, the etymology of language, particularly around social networks, is changing rather rapidly. I mean, the whole construct of being able to use the term friend as a verb has only really emerged in the past 2 years or so. Mm-hmm. So, having adaptations or live adaptations rather than the traditional firmware-based solutions that have occurred in the past. I mean, most of the solutions we have in the devices up until recently have been very much around very, very strict language models, as you mentioned earlier. And what my concern is, as a hardware manufacturer, is that we can't keep up with that in firmware. I mean, the new bands come out every day, new movies come out. I mean, Inglourious Bastards, the new Quentin Tarantino movie, is a perfect example of that. You've got to spell the word wrong to get to spell the word right. And I think, as we create a whole new vocabulary here, we're not going to be looking to the OED. We're actually going to be looking to folks like Vlingo and the social networks as the root of new words in the language and new utilizations of words. And I think being able to adapt to that's critical, particularly as we're trying to ride this particular wild pony into the stable.
That's right, and all the applications in the value chain have to do that in real time.
Yes.
It can't be every third month.
Any other questions? I'd like to thank Shoshana and Troy today for taking the time to talk about this. I think we'll be here after the panel. And thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Troy. Hey, thanks. Pleasure.
Lunch is, I believe, down the hallway.